Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Nordic Football Podcast. It's been a really juicy period of late. European results, the domestic leagues have been crazy. Transfer deadline day and the days building up to it. It just feels like a real culmination of stuff here. And I'm delighted to be joined by Jonathan Fadugba, my partner in crime. How are you doing?
Hi, everyone. Hi, Steve. Meatman Soccer himself. We're back. And thank you for joining us. Thank you to all our Patreon followers. So you guys know who you are. Just want to say a quick shout out to you guys straight at the beginning of this show. And yeah, happy to be here. Transfer deadline day just ended. Jim White has just put his tie away and we are ready for this week's episode. It's going to be a good one, I think. And there's a lot to talk about.
Do you know what? There's so much to talk about here. We've got European roundups. We've got, say, domestic league roundups. There's been loads of new signings to talk about and departures. Managers as well. We've got stuff going about listener questions, new managerial appointments for next season, and we may even be talking about some sort of Norwegians abroad as well in whatever form. So, well, I guess we're going to have to start off with the European night. And Thursday, in fact, probably the whole week, actually, Jonathan, was a disaster, really, for Scandinavian football, I'm afraid. Just not enough, really, happened in a positive way, and we've ended up with not many sides actually qualifying for the group stages.
Yeah, I think on that front, it's not been the best of seasons, has it? We were both sort of watching the games live on Thursday. We had the show last week previewing all the games for all the teams in Scandinavia, more or less. And well, two big ones from our point of view. Well, it was Malmö and Rosenborg. Didn't go too well, did it?
It didn't, and I mean, we kind of expected that, but there's always hope, isn't there? And I felt that, you know, if things kind of go your way, that maybe one of them could sneak through. There was also big hope from the Faroe Islands team, KI, but they just didn't quite have enough to get past Dundalk, did they, in that? But even FC Copenhagen got knocked out. An unbelievably ridiculous goal. I'm sort of sure you saw that, the one that got them knocked out. But yeah, bad night all round. Mulder obviously have qualified for the group stage from Norway, but only because they lost in the final round of the Champions League playoff. The Danish Midtjylland qualified for the Champions League group stage, so well done to them. But it's been nothing from Sweden, I'm afraid, this year. I think Cups were the final Finnish team knocked out. You kind of hope for a little bit more, don't you, from Scandinavia, but wasn't to be.
Yeah, and you know, from Malmö's point of view, they'll miss out on about sort of 3 to 5 million euros in terms of qualification money with their defeat against Granada. I mean, it was a really tough draw for them, to be honest. Let's be fair. Any team in Allsvenskan playing a La Liga team, you're going to be massive underdogs. To be honest, it wasn't really that. It was small margins, I felt, and I just felt that it was kind of a team with a little bit more know-how, a bit more nous. Just a little bit extra quality that really decided the game. It really wasn't huge margins between the two sides. Granada took the lead with pretty simple goal. Jonas Knudsen got caught down as one side, and Machis tapped in a cross. You know, sloppy defending from Malmö. Got a bit feisty during the game. You know, the racket went down holding his face, and there were some issues in that sense. But Malmö got back into it, and you know, I think they could have maybe won this game. To be honest, I think it was a bit of a missed opportunity. I didn't think Granada were as good as maybe you might have thought pre-match, looking at their team. Joe Inge Berget, you know, scored an equaliser, but second half it was just they managed to take their way. You know, they lost their concentration a little bit. Their left-hand side was quite weak. They scored from a throw-in. We talked about throw-ins and the importance of them, and they managed to do that. But yeah, second half, Granada just showed a little bit extra quality in key moments. Really poor marking from Malmö as well. Puertas scored one, and then some big misses as well. Ahmed Hodzic missed a big chance, and yeah, that was it really. So you know, Granada managed to get a third, and it was game over. So I think the one key takeaway I would say, and I think this is a lesson maybe for Allsvenskan teams maybe going forward, it's difficult to implement it, isn't it? But just that know-how. We talked about just being, for want of a better word, that shithousery, you know, just being like really nasty, and making the most of those key situations. Granada, as soon as they were leading, they were killing time. They were sort of going down. They were winning, drawing fouls. They had that know-how, and Malmö just didn't have it, and they didn't take the initiative at the moments when they needed to. And really, I think that was the key. It wasn't the technical quality as such on the day. It was actually the just lack of maybe big game experience at that level in terms of against La Liga opponents.
Yeah, I mean, I saw that tweet, and I guess that comes from being battle-hardened in La Liga, doesn't it, and such like that. I mean, it's a shame from Malmö's point of view. Clearly, Granada were not listening to the Nordic Football podcast, were they? They would have picked up on that long throw that you quite rightly highlighted pre-match. And I mean, I'll just go to the Rosenborg game now, and it was a 2-0 loss to PSV. To be honest, they were never really in it. It always felt like PSV just had the extra bit of class, and quality. I was quite impressed, actually, with PSV. I think I could see them certainly qualifying from the group stage and maybe getting a run to somewhere like the quarterfinals. They look to have some decent players in all areas of the field. The lad up front, I think he's Israeli, I'm not sure. Big fella anyway. He's quite old. He was causing all sorts of problems. He scored the opening goal anyway for them. But they look a decent side. And Rosenborg, they can hold their head up high a little bit, but they were just outclassed, really. It's just the way it is, isn't it? I think when you're the underdog in this sort of game, you needed the crowd, and it's not there. So, it's a shame it's over, but there are two teams from Scandinavia that have qualified in the Champions League. Midtjylland, they've landed a plum draw, really. They've got Liverpool, Ajax, and Atalanta. I mean, they're not going to qualify out of that group, are they? But fair play, they've got some nice teams to draw there. Maybe they might even fancy their chances against Liverpool after what we saw on the other night. What Villa did to them. But then Molde in the Europa League have got a cracking draw as well, really. Arsenal, Rapid Vienna, and Dundalk. I mean, I really like that draw, and it really caught my eye. Certainly, Arsenal. We've come across them before, haven't we, on this Nordic football podcast?
Well, yeah. I mean, taking a step back from it all, quite an interesting, maybe worrying outcome of it is there's only one Norwegian team and not a single Swedish team in the Champions League or Europa League group stages this season. You mentioned there, obviously, Molde are the team who will be representing. And then, there's a couple of, obviously, there's a Danish side as well. FC Copenhagen, like you say, you've got to Google that goal that knocked them out if you've not seen it. An incredible calamity of errors. Something out of Keystone Cops that moment, wasn't it? Ridiculous. But yeah, if you look at it, I mean, there's one Cypriot team, there's one Irish team, there's one Polish team, there's one Swiss team, there's one Hungarian team. You've got two Scottish teams, you've got two Israeli teams, you've got two Bulgarian teams, 3 Greek teams, 3 Czech teams, no Swedish teams, and only one Norwegian side. Is it a cause for concern, Steve, in general, about Scandinavia? And do you think it's just there's been some comments on Twitter that it's just a bad year, and there's been some comments that this is a worrying trend? What are your thoughts?
I don't think the coefficients are high enough, ultimately. There's always so many tough draws. But the other problem I always find is that the best teams from the previous year aren't often the best team the next year. Like, for example, Bodø Glimt, the best side in Norway this season. If they were in the Champions League draw and had the same draw that Molde had, I think they probably would have made the group stage. The other thing with Norway is the Norwegian Cup winners make it through to Europe, and that was Viking. And at the start of this qualifying run, they weren't in necessarily great form. They found a bit of form now, but even they come up against Aberdeen, who, I mean, you could say that's the sort of match you probably got to be winning, haven't you, in a one-off? But look, there's been some tough draws out there. The coefficient needs to improve. We need to get sides qualifying out of group stages when they get in there, Jonathan. Otherwise this is going to continue consistently. It is worrying, certainly for Sweden, that it didn't really look like. I mean, only Malmö actually even got to the final round, didn't they? At least in Norway, Rosenborg got to the final game, and Bodø Glimt actually were very, very competitive. But it's a concern. I would definitely say that.
Yeah, I think the one counterpoint to that is perhaps maybe it's a sign that we have competitive leagues here. And I think certainly if you look at, say, for example, Croatia, or if you look at other maybe leagues around the world, around sort of maybe the lesser European leagues, quote unquote, you have one team who really dominates the league, don't they? They're winning by 15 points every season. We were there a few years ago with Malmö when they were dominating, but the extra competitiveness, there's a trade-off there, isn't there? Because the more, you had Rosenborg winning it all the time. It's almost like you either have to have one dominant force who then just takes all their resources to challenge in Europe, or you have to live with the kind of challengers, but then you have to accept that they're going to share the pot around, and that's going to maybe decrease the quality when it comes to playing, the big boys. If Malmö win the league this season, then they're going to, have another crack at it. But, if Häcken, for example, win the league, which isn't out of the question, it might be unlikely, but it's going to be harder for them, isn't it, to get into the Champions League because they've never done it before. So there is a trade-off there, isn't there? And I suppose it depends. Do you want a competitive domestic league, or do you want one team dominating it and going on? Obviously, some leagues have the benefit of both, but certainly it's a difficult question, that, isn't it? One to consider.
I mean, one thing I will say going forward, and it's not often I'll praise UEFA, and I was very dubious initially, but maybe the Conference League, when it comes into operation, now is that next season or the season after, it might be a good thing for the leagues that we cover in Scandinavia. There'll be more chance for teams to expose themselves in a group stage of the Conference League. So perhaps going forward, that is a positive. It just seems it's very hard for anyone to qualify for the Champions League group stage now with the system they have it. But there's no reason why we shouldn't be getting more teams in certainly in the Conference League going forward. Europa League, I don't think hardly anyone out of Scandinavia will actually qualify for the main Europa League going forward, if memory serves me correct.
Yeah, I've not looked into it, but looking at the coefficients, just for reference, the best team in Scandinavia in terms of UEFA coefficients is FC Copenhagen, as anyone will probably expect, in 36th place. That's behind the likes of Olympiacos, CSKA Moscow, and Inter Milan, but it's actually above the likes of Braga, Lazio, Monaco, Ghent, PSV, Wolfsburg. So they're quite well placed, but you've got to go way down to get to a Norwegian or Swedish team, and there's a big gap there. So Malmö's the next in 66th. So a lot to do, but that's the state of play in terms of Europe. We wish Molde well. I know some listeners will be definitely wishing Molde anything but well, but we'll be covering them, of course, in the Europa League with some massive games against Arsenal and Dundalk as well, who saw off the challenge of the Faroes. And just before we move on to domestic matters, it was a good year for the Faroes, wasn't it? Though the counterpoint to this, it was a very positive campaign for them, really, wasn't it? And a lot of unexpected results they pulled off, and it looks like their football's on the up.
I mean, who knows? If that had been a two-legged tie, they might have gone through. Or if the match had been hosted in the Faroe Islands, maybe they would have gone through. Fantastic year for the Faroe Islands as a whole, and not just in terms of the domestic league. I think their actual international team is doing quite well. So it's good to see that, and maybe they can kick on going forward. Let's see. I think it's maybe not such a Mickey Mouse pathetic league that some people think it is, because there's some sides there that can hold their heads up high, I think.
For sure. Now let's move on to domestic matters. There's been the transfer window as well. The transfer windows in Norway and Sweden, as well as around Europe. I'm actually going to throw a listener question to you first, because everybody knows Bodø Glimt are well clear at the top of Norway. You can tell us the points gap in a minute. We'll briefly touch upon them and the weekend's results. But firstly, I just want to talk about the Jens Petter Hauger move. He's moved to Milan. He played 19 minutes against Spezia Calcio, looking very nice in his red and black kit there. But there's been some movements in for Bodø Glimt, hasn't there? There's been a few transfers, and we've had some questions from listeners about their dealings. What's next for Bodø Glimt in terms of regenerating that team?
Well, what's interesting to me is obviously last season they sold Amor Layuni, was the first sale around sort of match day 22, I think it was, to the Egyptian league, and he'd been a big player for them. Then they sold Håkon Evjen at the end of the season. And if you remember in my pre-season in the podcast there, I was saying ultimately they're probably going to drop down the table a little bit, because those are big losses. But what Bodø Glimt have done, they've shook off those blows before, and they've already looked like they've shaken off the loss of Jens Petter Hauger. I mean, to be fair, they would have been eyeing up replacements anyway, already within the squad for Hauger. For example, Ole Solskjaer and Sebastian Tunekti, even his own brother, Runar Hauger. Guys like that. Sondre Fett has come into the team this year, who can play pretty much anywhere. So already within the squad, they would have eyed that up, but they've signed some players. Hugo Vetelsen from Stabæk, They brought in Vegard Moberg back from, they had him before, I think, Silkeborg in Denmark. He was an ex-player of them. So already Glimt are not standing still. They want to. It would be a shock if they didn't win the title from here. But Hugo Vetelsen, I'm going to have to talk about him very soon in detail. But what I like about them is they're obviously thinking long term. They've got a long term vision in place. They don't just want to win this league and then this is look back as a one-off season like a Leicester sort of thing. They want to try and compete regularly at the top of this Eliteserien. And to do that, you've got to, if you lose players, you've got to keep bringing in good talent. And it looks like they're doing that.
Yeah, it's a deal until 2023. He's been at Stabæk since he was 12 years old, and he's moving on to Glimt. He said it's an incredibly fun and very exciting move for me. And one of the things that has attracted him there is that they give young players a chance. He said they've proven time after time that they give young players a chance to develop. And he describes himself as a technical midfielder who can play in several roles. He says, I have a good running capacity, and this year I'm more productive in terms of goals and that kind of thing. What kind of player is he, Steve, from your point of view?
Very good technical player. He's from the famed Stabæk Youth Academy. I'm a bit sad, actually, for Stabæk recently in the last sort of 18 months. They've just lost so many of their young prospects. And, Ole Brynhildsen at the start of the season, that didn't go very well down well with the fans. But a number of good young players just, they keep leaving this place. And it's a shame to see. I'd love to see them sort of grow up at Stabæk for another couple of years. But Vetelsen is a central midfield playmaker who has adapted to play out wide as well. Who, I say, technically a great player on the ball, very balanced, skillful. And he's just a typical sort of Bodø Glimt player. He's got a great engine on him, sort of player that will run all day. He'll suit their pressing system. And a perfect fit for the Bodø Glimt system. He can play in the middle of the park there. And I dare say they could even convert him into one of their wingers if they had to. So looks a fantastic buy. I'm sure they've had their eye on him for a while. And a really good young player, still only 20 years old. So fantastic acquisition.
Yeah, and there's one other signing, isn't there? Vegard Moberg.
Moberg is, an ex-player of theirs, midfield engine. And, obviously the move, I don't think, to Silkeborg worked out as well as he wanted to. But again, it's long-term planning, isn't it? That's the key with these sort of signings. You've got to think not just in the next sort of 4 or 5 months, 6 months. You've got to think sort of 12 months or even 18 months down the line or longer. But they've got a good plan in place here at Bodø Glimt. And what I'm really interested to see, they're going to win the gold medal this year. I would love to see them be up there competing again long term. I want to see sides mixing it with Rosenborg, Molde. Vålerenga look like they're ambitious again as well, which is good to see. We want to see some really top sides the next 2 or 3 years in the Eliteserien. I'm a lot more hopeful than I was. I was quite depressive like a couple of years ago, wasn't I, on this podcast? But I'm a lot more excited about Norwegian football these days, and I think it's heading in the right direction. Yeah,
and he said after signing the deal, tonight I'll be celebrating with some stockfish for dinner. So hope he enjoyed I hope he enjoyed your stockfish there, Vegard. And why wouldn't you? Because Glimt have won 7 in a row now, and they're just well clear, aren't they? I mean, it's approaching 20 points. It's unbelievable, really, isn't it? I mean, they've beaten Sandefjord, who I'm looking at the table, and they're actually doing okay in terms of avoiding relegation, which it looks like a surprise. Maybe they'd been considered dead certs for relegation. But yeah, it's a big win for Glimt, isn't it? It takes them one step closer, and B, Sandefjord are doing okay, aren't they?
This game, I've got to give Sandefjord some credit. Actually, twice this season they've played Bodø Glimt and they've only lost 2-1 on both occasions. And I tell you what, I think they could have easily nabbed a draw in either of those games. They play. Marty Cifuentes is a top coach. For me, it's the battle between the two best coaches in the league this year. They went 2-0 down quickly, but he didn't give up. He's constantly barking instructions out there. And you know what? He got them back in the game, and they did have chances to equalise. I think the goalkeeper had a good game for Sandefjord, to be fair. He kept them in it, but they had chances to equalise. They nearly nabbed the late one in like 92nd minute, and you wouldn't have begrudged them it. Sandefjord. Fair play to them. They've played Bodø Glimt probably harder than any other team in the league this year, like genuinely. But 18 points clear at the top they are. And I think by my calculations, they only need, 6 wins? 5 wins? Something like that. I'm usually quite good at maths, but I can't quite work it out.
They depends on Rosenborg's results, of course, Molde in third place. But if they're 18 points clear.
Yeah, Rosenborg can get 68 points. Yeah, they only need 13 points. That's not a lot of points, is it?
I mean, they're still unbeaten, which I find unbelievable. Can they go unbeaten the whole season? And is that even been done before in Norway?
Well, they could do. They've got an away trip to Molde next, which might be the toughest remaining game. I mean, they've still got Rosenborg to play. So let's see. It's possible. They keep doing a professional job. Like, you could say that was a match where, they're coming off a tough week. They've lost their best player and they got the job done. They dug one out. They weren't at their best, but they still got the 3 points. And they've shown every sign of champions going forward. Can't praise this team any higher, really. It's unbelievable. Can they go unbeaten? I always keep saying there's going to be one match somewhere where they're just not on it and nothing goes their way. Red card or something, or chances an opposition keeper has a blinder. So I still think somewhere someone will get a victory against them. But, hell of a side, hell of a footballing side.
You'll have to dig into your archives and let us know if anyone's ever gone a season unbeaten. I'm sure maybe it's definitely a rare occasion. But yeah, 6 more wins and they're definitely guaranteed to win the title. That's if Rosenborg win every single game, which, given they've lost 4 this season and drawn 5 out of 20, they might not need the 6 wins. But that's just stunning, really. But the Glimt train continues to march, march? Do trains march? No, continues to roll on. But the battle for the medal spots, top 3, of course. Vålerenga and Odd are still in there, aren't they? And Kristiansand even is not too far away from third place.
Well, this really excites me, actually. I think it's a hell of a battle we've got going on. Molde are, for me, come through the second best side in the league on paper and really in terms of performances. But they did have a bad slump. The European matches definitely affected them. And maybe they'll affect them again when they're in the group stage. But, Rosenborg, Molde, it's really hard to say who's going to finish second and third this year. I think there's a case to be made for so many different sides, and it could go right to the wire, I think. It's good stuff. All these teams play pretty attractive front foot football. There's so many goals in the league this year. Like, there's more, I think over 2.5 goals rate is nearly at 70%, which is, even for this league, it's astronomical. It's almost like Premier League levels at the minute, where things have been a bit batshit mental this year. I'm convinced it's got to be something to do with the lack of crowds, whether it's the pressure on the players is not as much, or just communication's a lot easier. But there's so many goals around at the minute. But all these teams are good on the attack-minded, and there's only 4 points between 6 teams at the moment, between 5 teams. So really, it's all to play for with 10 rounds to go. I think they've all got to play each other in some form, and I say a really good, entertaining battle. And I usually man for a prediction, but I really I'm struggling here. I don't even know who's going to finish second or third.
Well, 10 games to go. There's still a fair way to go, isn't there? In that one, Kristiansand have got games coming up. They've got Rosenborg next, and then Vålerenga away, and then Bodø Glimt, and then Molde. So good luck to them. They're gonna earn it if they're gonna get through that and be still in the top 6. And Odd, of course, and Vålerenga have got some big games coming up. But we've got a question from a listener, Steve, and I want to ask you about a transfer now, and it's a player called Berk Riise.
Yes, and now this was a deadline day signing. Berk Riise, a left back from Odd to Molde, and I think this is a tremendous pickup, actually, because there's an article coming out soon on the Wisecout blog that I've done on Molde, and in that article I do note that something like 13 of their last 15 goals that they conceded, the origin was actually on the right-hand side of the opposition offence. Now, that, for me, they've had issues on that side of the field, Molde. Christopher Haugen hasn't been at his best this year. He's been injured. I just don't think he's come back and he's looked as sharp either. Like, he was a very strong left back last year, but it just hasn't been as good in 2020. and it's been a vulnerable area for them. And I think they certainly realised that they needed either very strong competition for him or a very, very good backup. And Riise delivers that. He can also play anywhere on that left-hand side, left wing, left mid if they want him to. In fact, I do believe he can play in a lot of positions on the field. I've got him down on my spreadsheets, on my databases as even he can even play centre back or striker, according to me. He's such a versatile player, but primarily he's in as a left back, and I think it's a tremendous pickup for Molde, and just the sort of signing they needed really. Defensively, they've had issues this year, and I would expect him to be pushing Christopher Hogan for the start there on that left hand side. I would go with Riise based on what I've seen this season.
84 games and 5 goals he scored in his time there. And yeah, it looks like, from the noises coming out, it's a really good signing. And it seems like you've given it, your stamp of approval. He's done a medical and looks like it's a done deal. So, there's quite a few moves between teams, isn't there, in the way at the moment?
There is. There's been a few others that we need to mention. Gustav Valsvik has gone to Stabæk on loan from Rosenborg. It's just interesting that the new manager at Rosenborg has just kind of frozen Valsvik out to the bench straight away. Basically, just brought a new guy in from Iceland, and Valsvik's surplus to requirements. It seems. That's a good signing for Stabæk because they've lost Andreas Hansch Olsen to Ghent in Belgium. That's a surprise, isn't it? Belgium again, raiding Scandinavia. So Valsvik is not a bad replacement there for him. What else has been going on? Holm Frid Johnson has left Aalesund to Brescia in Italy. I think we did mention in a podcast a few weeks ago that he might leave the club. He was linked with moves away. But yeah, there's been a few internal transfers throughout this window. Loans as well. That's where it tends to be, I think, this year. In this COVID-19 age, I think there's been more inclination to move domestically.
Yeah, and those questions were from Ramon Villageliu Arnella, I think. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. He was asking about Hugo Vetelsen. And Ted Cruz, my son, asked about Valsvik going on loan to Stabæk. Do you want to just add anything to that? Because you mentioned it, but is there anything you want to say about Valsvik?
I like Valsvik because he's just a solid, sort of dependable player. I get why Rosenborg kind of might have just wanted to move on from him because, if you're at a club that ultimately you want to be ambitious and winning titles and competing in Europe, Gustav Valsvik isn't good enough for that. He's been frozen out to the bench in the last sort of 6 to 8 games. If you can, why sit on the bench when you can start at Stabæk in the league and showcase your talents? He's a big lad. I think he can go quite well there. I think it's a good move for all parties.
Yeah, and we've got another listener question from Lewis Turner. At Turner Louis J, who asks, is it going to be tough for Stabæk to stay up now? Are they genuinely candidates for relegation after Hansch Olsen and Vetlesen have gone?
No, they'll be fine. They're well clear. They're 11 points clear of the automatic relegation spot, and they are 7 clear of the playoff match, which is start at the minute. Now, I think Stabæk are only going to need about another 5-6 points to guarantee themselves survival. They're going to find victories. They've won 2 of their last 4 games, Jonathan. They're such an inconsistent side. You cannot predict them. You've probably got more chance of predicting the national lottery results than Stabæk. But I tell you what, they always pick up a win somewhere when you're not saying where you least expect it, but they'll get a result. They've got a good manager, and they've still got some decent talent within the squad. Unfortunately, they have lost a lot of their own ability, but yeah, they signed well. They got Sami Skeet came back from. He was on loan last year. They signed for Bodø Glimt, then he come back here. They got up front Erik Botheim, who more needs to come from them. They've got a problem with striker, to be honest. They need someone to step up there. This signing of Valsvik will be decent. They've got enough quality to finish probably mid-table.
Good stuff. And yeah, moving down to the relegation zone before we end this section on Norway. Mjøndalen and Ålesund are down the bottom of the table, and things are sort of heating up down the bottom, aren't they? We're getting to last 10 games now, 20 games played. It's crunch time is coming, isn't it? a bit of a gap opening up, isn't there? 7 points between Arlesund and Mjøndalen, the bottom two, and then a further 4 points from Mjøndalen in 15th to start in 14th, 4-point gap, and then another 4-point gap to pure safety, which is Haugesund in 13th. A start in the driving seat there, and it looks like it's curtains for Arlesund. Is that right to say?
Do you know Arlesund are not as bad as you think these days under Lars-Arne Nielsen? I think he's been in charge for 5 games, and they've lost all of them, but 4 of the 5 have been by just a 1-goal margin. And I actually think they've played all right under him. But now they've lost Frid Johnson. I think they're kind of resigned to the fact that they're going to be relegated. They're the sort of side I could see them going down and they're absolutely smashing the OBOS Ligaen next season. You know what I mean? Under a good manager, because at the minute I could see them doing someone over soon, like surprising them. But I think it's too much to ask. Start are a funny side, aren't they? I mean, they just seem to. They've signed a couple of older guys in this window. A fella called Bolaños, who used to be in Vancouver Whitecaps in the MLS there. So he's an interesting addition. Another old guy, Mohamed El Makrini, midfielder. He scored against Haugesund the week. They beat Haugesund 5-1. I've not actually seen this match yet. There's 5 matches on at the 5 p.m. and I always like to kind of have my own 4 of them, and I pick a game which I don't believe is going to have much interest to me, and it was that one. So I've not seen that game yet, but it was a crazy score, 5-1. They just feel like a bunch of mercenaries. They start the last sort of 2 or 3 years. I mean, it looks like they're going to finish sort of 3rd bottom and then the playoff. Who knows? Mjøndalen, I've got concerns. I just do. I feel like I need to do another tactical analysis on them and maybe give a helping hand to Vegard Hansen. You know, it's. I just feel like something could be done with them. He's almost been too negative this year. I just feel like they could maybe still graft their way out of trouble. But start winning 5-1 there is a big blow to Mjøndalen, and even Arlesund would have fancied still catching them. But yeah, there's 2 at the bottom are just losing games all the time right now.
Give him a call. You got his number, haven't you?
Somewhere. I mean,
get him on the blower.
I just feel Mjøndalen lost their way a little bit this year. From like last year, he was defensive in some games, but he mixed it up and he had a proper go in other ones. Like they're just far too on the back foot in matches that I know they can win. Like the Sandefjord game was. I know they missed a penalty, which is big. Sarpsborg away, they hardly created a chance.
Yeah,
I'm not knocking them for losing. Say, Vålerenga at the weekend. That's fine. It's just in those other games where they just need to have a go a bit more. The squad is limited. Don't get me wrong, but you can get more out of there. Just please have a go in some of the games instead of sort of being this negativity.
Well, they've scored the fewest amount of goals in the league. They've scored 15 goals in 20 games, which is, relegation form, let's face it. And they've lost six in a row. So not looking too good for them. Next games are Brann and then Bodø Glimt away and then Molde at home. So, yeah, tough run of games coming up for Mjøndalen as well. I think that's it for the, Norway section of this podcast. We may talk about a Norwegian in part 2. I'm not going to reveal who it is. But,
it's not quite the end of the Norwegian theme, I don't think, for this episode.
But before we do, Steve, just a quick one. Daniel Gretersen has signed for Blackpool FC. Norwegian, from Norwegian side. Arlesund, he's an Icelandic international. Do you have any comments on him? So quite a big move for him, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Blackpool, it's a strange one, isn't it? Look, that defence has been conceding goals left, right, and centre. Doesn't bode particularly well. I mean, he's not a bad player. I mean, he doesn't help that the team he's been in this year. What league are Blackpool in these days? Is it League 1, League 2? I'm not sure. But if that's League 1 level, I'm a little bit worried for Blackpool. You
don't think he's League 1 level?
He probably is. Yeah, maybe. But like I say, I've not been that impressed with him this season on the field from what I've seen. I think he's more of an OBOS Ligaen sort of defender, if I'm being brutally honest. And I don't want to sound too harsh there. So I mean, what level is the OBOS Ligaen in compared to English football? Probably is sort of bottom end League 1, right? So maybe it'll be all right.
Interesting stuff. Yeah. So I mean, well, Blackpool are sort of 21st in League One at the moment, 3 points from their first 4 games. So not, maybe faring too well, but their manager said the recruitment department has worked extremely hard to identify players and with the right attributes who will improve our squad. And Daniel fits into that category. He'll bring experience at club and international level, and he views coming to England and joining Blackpool as the next step in his career. So, yeah, maybe that's a test case for you to see the level of Arlesson versus bottom of League One, and we'll keep tabs on that Icelandic international, as I've said. So that just about wraps it up. But one more question for you, and that is from good friend of the podcast and loyal supporter, Jürgen Hernholm. And he asks, best signing of the Norwegian transfer window?
I think the best signing is Vidar Kjartansson, that Vålerenga, the striker that's moved to Vålerenga, because I just think this guy can move. They've shown ambition in this window, Vålerenga. They've brought in Henrik Bjørdal as well. I just think long-term Kjartansson, and he already has scored quite a few goals for them. He's missed a couple of big chances too. But I just feel like if you get a couple of seasons out of Kjartansson, he's going to bag you, and he stays fit, he's going to bag you at least 15 goals every year, maybe more. He's just an all-round threat, and he just adds another dimension to Vålerenga. So that's the signing I'm going to say is the best from this window.
Great stuff. And yeah, thank you to Jürgen Holm as ever for your support. You're an extremely loyal member of the pod in terms of listeners and one of the originals, I believe. So yeah, thank you for that question. And that wraps it up for part 1. In part 2, we're going to talk about Sweden. We're going to wrap up some of the major transfers that have been done and talk about a few of the teams who have performed well. And then we're going to cover maybe a few other bonus talking points from Scandinavian football. So join us for that.
Welcome back to the Nordic Football Podcast. I'm Steve Wyss, and I'm joined with Jonathan Fadugba here. And it's the Swedish section. We've got to talk about the transfers that have been going on in the Allsvenskan. And there's been quite a lot of movement, haven't there, Jonathan? What's caught your eye so far?
Yeah, there's been some transfers, and I think the first place to start really is our the biggest move probably in terms of maybe from an English perspective is the one to the Premier League. We've had a youngster from Beko Häcken has gone to Everton, top of the table. The mighty Blues are flying at the moment, aren't they? The Toffees. Everton fans are loving it at the moment. They're top of the iTunes charts, top of the Premier League charts. Who knows what they'll be top of next. But they've got on top of this transfer, and it's a deal for 17-year-old Imam Jagne from Beko Häcken's academy. Now, this is a player that I talked about in pre-season. I put him in my Allsvenskan 10 to watch. So I'm pretty happy about that. From the point of view of him playing, he didn't actually play, I don't think, a single game in Allsvenskan this season, maybe one at best. But yeah, there's been a bit of a weird situation with him this season. So it's resulted in this transfer. A move was on the cards and it's been completed now. He's joined up with Everton's under-23s and his name is Imam Jagne.
Yeah, I mean, he was in your 10 to watch pre-season, Jonathan, and just briefly, what can Everton fans expect from him both now and sort of in the future? What qualities do you think he could bring to them?
Well, he signed on a 3-year deal till 2023. He'll go into the 23s. He's a very raw player, and I think he was spotted at the Gothia Cup. I saw him when I was out there in Sweden at the time. Quite raw, a lot of raw potential. He's originally Gambian descent, and I think that one of the things about him, of course, is I'm not sure he's really nailed a position down yet. I think that's one of the challenges that will come for him. He's a midfield player, and there's a few little strands here which I'll go into, and then round it off by sort of talking about him. One of the major strands of this whole transfer and in general is because of the pandemic and COVID-19. The youth seasons were cancelled in Sweden, so there's been a lot of the youth leagues cancelled. So the sort of under 19s, under 21s, those kind of things. Usually, usually Sweden is full of youth games and youth leagues, and it's a really good country for youth football from that point of view. A lot of the leagues were cancelled, so that's left players like Jagne, who are maybe on the fringes of the first team at Häcken. It's left him without any football So what actually happened this season is he was supposed to play for the first team, but the manager of Häcken didn't really rate him enough to maybe have him in his first team squad. But there's no under-19s, so he's been in a situation where he's not played much football at all for the last sort of 6 months, which has obviously held back his development. Another reason for that is because this deal to Everton's been on the cards for quite a while. Since early September, it's been on the cards. Manchester United have been watching him as well, but they've passed on him. But yeah, he's a midfield player. I think he can play further forward as well. He's a decent crosser of the ball, so he can play further forward. And maybe in the future he may do that. But I see him as a sort of potential box-to-box sort of driving midfielder. Decent passer of the ball, gets on the ball. He's quite progressive. Very determined character. He's from Biskopsgarden, which is an area of Gothenburg that's quite well known. You get a lot of the immigrant community type thing comes from that section of the city, part of the city with a real flavour and character. Some call it a dodgy area, but I wouldn't necessarily agree. But yeah, he's got a lot of talent, Jagne, and I think this move's been on the cards for a while, and I think it's quite deserved.
We see a lot of big clubs scouting these type of players in Scandinavia. I mean, you mentioned Man United there, loads of others as well. But it just never seems to me that enough of these really bigger clubs actually end up going in for them. I mean, do you give credit here to Everton for sort of striking here, or is it a bit of a shot in the dark for them, a risky move? I mean, I just don't see it as a risk. There's not enough of these. Why are more of these big clubs should be just taking more of a punt, because there's loads of talent out there, and this lad could be the latest of them. Yeah,
that's a good question. And the best Premier League team at scouting Scandinavia is Brighton, in my opinion, easily by miles. When I was out there, they probably know. I know a couple of people on the ground there. Some really good people working at Brighton who scout Scandinavia. They know pretty much every single player inside out. Everton, obviously. A lot of clubs, send scouts out. It's pretty much in these days of video, most clubs know about most players. Really, there's no real hidden secrets anymore in football these days with video and the rise of things like Y-Scout. But some take it more seriously than others. I think Everton, this speaks to their development over the last few seasons. I think they've had a lot of investment, of course, with the owners that came in, Mashiri, and of course. Marcel Brands, is their sporting director now, I believe, or director of football. He's in charge of their kind of recruitment and that kind of thing. And then they've got Carlo Ancelotti. I think they've got a really slick operation building there. And Jagne probably fits into that. Mm-hmm. In terms of the backstory to this deal, it was, Jagne was told he's not allowed to play for the club for a couple of games. And he was asking the club, like, why are you holding me back from playing, basically? And he described it as being like a bit of a James Bond script. He wasn't sure why he wasn't playing. And, he went to lunch and was told that when he came back from lunch that he was asking, why can't I play? And they said, we can't tell you. And then eventually they told him that the reason is because there's a Premier League club watching you and it's Everton. So he was absolutely delighted. He's been keen to leave, really, Häcken. I think he's not got the first team football that he wanted. And he feels he's, even at 16, just turned 17 last week, but he felt he's ready for first team football already. So at Häcken, it's not quite happened. Häcken have had a really good season, so I don't think you can criticise Häcken, if that makes sense. I think they've done things well, but he just didn't fit into their squad because they've got a lot of competition. So I really think for all parties, this is probably a pretty good move. And you do get some clubs who go in and watch these players and don't pull the trigger for various reasons. Everton have taken the chance here, and I think one good thing for Jagne is that he's going to go into their 23s and start playing football. He needs it at this stage of his development, and he'll develop. And one thing he's already talked about is he's already said he wants to work on his crossing. He wants to improve his left foot. So you already get the sense he knows where he wants to go in football, and he seems quite driven. He's moving to Liverpool. He said he's going to move his mum and his brother there and settle in and kick on. And he wants to play in the Champions League. So a driven character, and I think it'll be one to watch. You can never guarantee with a 17-year-old where it'll go, but certainly some raw potential there to be moulded by the coaching staff at Everton.
Imam Jagne to Everton there. Let's talk about some other dealings. And there's been quite a few departures out of the league as per usual, and actually some decent money been racked up as well. Just a few to mention here. Leonard Zuter, left back from Häcken, gone to Lecce in Italy, £650,000. Jesper Karlsson to AZ Alkmaar from Elfsborg. 2.34 million. That is quite a large fee, really, for an Allsvenskan striker there. And Rasmus Lauritsen has moved to Dinamo Zagreb from Norrköping, £1.26 million. I know you're very interested to talk about that particular deal.
Yeah, Lauritsen, for me, I think there's a strong argument he's been the best defender in Allsvenskan this season, best defender in the league. A huge blow for Norrköping, in my opinion, losing him, and they lost today without him 2-1 against Sirius. So, they lost at home, and that's pretty much them done for the title this season, although, you could argue it was way off the cards anyway. But, you may remember, Steve, they had an incredible start to the season. They started so well and looked so good for a long time. Lauritsen was a huge part of that. A towering presence in both boxes. He scored so many goals. He was very good for your fantasy team if you had him. He was my captain for a while, and he banged in a lot of headers from corners and that kind of thing. Very dangerous in the box, defensively as well. Got his head on things, clearances, sort of a rugged defender, no nonsense. And kind of reminded me of I wouldn't say he's as good as Nemanja Vidic, but kind of that kind of mold of player. A sort of tall, robust player who can put his body on the line. I think it's a good move for Dinamo Zagreb. I think it's a good bit of scouting. They picked him up from Denmark. He's a Danish player. They picked him up from Vejle for, I think, 180 grand, and they flipped him on now for about 1.5 million euros. So, from that point of view, I think it's one of the biggest top 3 maybe transfers in Norrköping's history in terms of funds coming in. So they couldn't really turn it down in this financial climate. They had to let him go, and they'll see off the season without him. But it is a big blow for them to lose him in terms of the rest of this season. It will knock them because he was a really influential player.
Yeah, that's going to be a blow. I mean, I say 1.26 million seems like a decent amount. Maybe they could have got more for him there. It sounds like he's had a hell of a good year. With a few more transfers here. Marcus Antonsen, I didn't even notice this one actually. He's moved to Stabæk on loan from Malmö. Antonsen, he's not bad, is he? He could be able to do a job there for them. And Vladimir Rodic has moved on loan to Odd from Hammarby. I mean, what can you tell us about Rodic, John?
Yeah, he's not been getting a huge amount of game time as much as he would probably want, I think, this season. Quite a versatile player. He's right-sided. Hammarby have decided to let him sort of seek maybe more regular first team minutes. So I think it's an interesting move for Norway. I'll be keen to know how he gets on, see how he adapts, because I think there is a player there, and he's had some very good games. But at his age, I think he needs to be playing games, and I think he's taken that opportunity to maybe go to Norway. So obviously one of those cross-party transfers, isn't it? You'll have to look after him and let me know how he gets on. Primarily a sort of right mid or right winger. Just turned 27, I believe, or 26. And yeah, not been as prominent as he would have liked to be this season, I think, for Hammarby.
I think he'll probably go quite well. It sounds like he'll fit into the Odd system there. I mean, just before we move on to sort of talking about the league, any other transfer do you really like to talk about there in the Allsvenskan?
Well, I think Antonsen wasn't getting much game time at Malmö, so that's one that you've mentioned. Jesper Karlsson is probably one of the biggest moves. He's gone to join Hakon Evjen. I think he was one of the standout players in the league. To be honest, he's been really, really good. I think he deserves his move. In terms of expected goals, he's fifth in the league. Karlsson, he's always had potential. And expected goals and assists, he's 4th. And in terms of goals and assists combined, he's joint top of the Allsvenskan along with Christopher Niemann and Stefano Vecchia. So yeah, it's a big talent leaving the league. I think he'll go well. I think at 22 years old, he's got the potential to improve. I think Dutch teams don't tend to sort of come to Scandinavia unless they really feel strongly about a player, do they? So I think they've got a player there. It's a bit of a blow for Elfsborg, but the money involved meant it had to happen. And wish him well. There's another Dutch player. Well, another Swede moving to the Netherlands, and that's our friend Benjamin Nygren.
Oh yes, I saw that tweeted. Is that a loan deal or a transfer?
Yeah, so it's a 2-year loan with an option to buy. He's leaving Belgium. It's not quite worked out for him in Belgium, but pretty good scouting from Heerenveen to pick him up. I think he's a fantastic talent still, and I think there's a player there. So from my point of view, I think it's a really good bit of business for Heerenveen. I think they'll be able to work with him, maybe a little bit less pressure. There's no pressure in terms of that big money move that he made. Maybe he can go to a different environment, adapt. Heerenveen have made quite a good start to the season, I think, in the Eredivisie. But yeah, it's Toulon with an option, so it looks like he'll be there for at least good while, get a chance to settle, and real talent there if someone can mold him properly. Because for EFCO he was fantastic.
Yeah, I think that's a good league to go to. Wide open, loads of chances, and hopefully he gets good game time there and actually proves how good he is again. Really, but so let's just move on to the actual league itself. Malmö are clear at the top, 9 clear actually right now, although Häcken do have a game in hand. So it's looking good for Malmö. Häcken, let's say, in second, Norrköping in third, Elfsborg fourth. And then we've got a bunch of teams sort of packed, Elfsborg, Sirius, Djurgården. We've got a couple of listener questions, actually, about those two teams. I just want to ask you about. The first one is, will Sirius be on the podium? Jonathan, that was from Marek Vadas, or Wadas. Will IK Sirius finish on the podium this season?
It's a good question after today. I mean, Norrköping took the lead after 37 minutes. Simon Tan to Christopher Niemann, who made it 1-0, but it was not long-lived, that lead. Yukiya Sugita, one of the best players in the league this season, in my opinion. One of the breakout players anyway, in terms of just star names who sort of seems to have come from nowhere. He equalised. And then Sirius took the lead through Mohamed Said, another one who's had a really good season. They win 2-1 now, and it means that they're 1 point away from a European place, the team from Uppsala. Seems to be a really good vibe about Sirius this season. Just everyone seems to be enjoying their football. Mohamed Said, who scored the winner, said, we're having a really good season and a lot of fun together. We're taking it game by game. They've got a lot of players really pulling up trees. Stefano Vecchia, I just mentioned. He's been a player who's just sort of grown this season. 14 goals and assists combined for the 25-year-old. They've got a lot going for them at this moment in time. And listen, finishing top 3 will be an unbelievable achievement. I think it would be the highest position in their history by some distance. Just a couple of examples. They've got the second top passer in the league in terms of in Tim Björkstrom. They've got a lot of good things going about. They've got a really nice passing style. They might be a team that I might cover in a Y-Scout blog coming up. But there's a lot to like about Sirius this season. I'm not sure they'll finish top 3 if I'm honest. I think they'll get pipped. But I'm only basing that on the fact that other teams maybe have a bit more experience. But in terms of who's playing the best and who's been sort of quite consistent, Sirius have been consistently pretty solid this year. So they've got contenders. I think Djurgården will still be a contender. I think Hammarby haven't run their race yet. I think they've got a little bit more to offer. Elfsborg might have a dip now. They've lost a few players, but they're in with a chance, that's for sure.
Interesting stuff. And there was another question. This is from La Bitia Core del FPL.
How's his Spanish accent there?
Thanks very much for the question. Will Djurgården be back this season after heartbreaking in Europe?
Yeah, it was a tough result for them. We talked about it on the last podcast, so go back onto iTunes or Spotify or however you get your podcasts and have a little listen back if you want a breakdown of that game where they were knocked out by Cluj. I don't think they'll make Europe, but I think they'll be very close. I think they've got a good chance. I said I think they could finish top 3, but they've just hit the buffers a little bit in recent weeks. Not won a game in 6. So a lot of them, in fairness to them, have been draws. But they drew the derby this past weekend, 1-1 with Hammarby. Last minute goal from Jesper Nyholm to throw it away. Tankovic scored, and that's probably his last goal for Hammarby because he's off to Greece. But Djurgården rescued it in the last minute. But they've not won since August. So 15th of August when they beat Örebro. So just hit the buffers a bit. I thought they were looking good for a European place, but they're going to need to pick up some form in this last round of games. The next games are Malmö and Sirius, and then Häcken. So give it 3 weeks, we'll know pretty much if they're going to be able to pull it off or if they're going to fall by the wayside. My opinion, I think they'll be 3rd or 4th.
Interesting about that. There's one more team I know you really want to talk about in this episode, and that is Östersund, who are currently in 9th spot, and they've done pretty well considering all the off the field drama they've had in the last couple of years. They look like they're going to be safe this year, don't they? I mean, I know you've been really impressed with what you've seen on the field in the last couple of months, and how they managed to turn things around from being basically this sort of, doom and gloom relegation candidate to pretty safe mid-table.
Well, they're a hated club, aren't they? They're the sort of AFC Eskilstuna now of Sweden. Whenever you mention Östersund, you're likely to get a raft of angry, Malmö or Djurgården or AIK fans or someone having a dig at them because they're not popular. They've let's say skirted the boundaries of the rules in terms of Swedish 50+1 rule, that kind of thing, the financial rules, and there's been a lot of controversies around their owner and the financial problems. So I can understand why teams don't like them, but we have to deal with them on merit on the pitch as well when we talk about them on the podcast. And let's be fair, despite their lousy economy and despite their terrible sort of headlines over the last year or so, they're doing quite well. They've been one of the best teams in Allsvenskan in recent months. It has to be said. Of course, Ian Birchnell left the club earlier in the season, but the new manager, to be fair to him, I think when we talked about them at the time when Birchnell was sacked, we kind of ridiculed him because he didn't have his coaching badges, and I downgraded my prediction for them for the season to maybe even be looking at relegation. But no, not at all. They've really done well, and I have to give praise to as Rafshan, who's come from the fourth division club. So I don't know how they've picked him up, but he certainly built a team there, and they haven't lost since July. They've only lost once since July against Elfsborg, and they've gone 8 straight games now without defeat. So he's started to build a real solid mentality there. He's talked about building a value-based culture. That's what he's called it. And he said that we don't want to build a club that's just based on results. We also want to build a club that's based on kind of values and a learning environment. Those are his words. And about constantly having a mindset where we focus on our strengths. So he's talked a good game, in fairness to him, and he's started to get some results. There's been a few English players doing fairly well. Gino Baptiste has been scoring goals, and Blair Turgot's doing quite well as well. So yeah, Östersund have not done anywhere near as badly as maybe some might have predicted when Birchnell left.
Yeah, I mean, fair play to them. There's some sides that have moved up towards mid-table. I think Örebro are another example there. Looked like they were going to be in a relegation battle early in the season, but they've got out of trouble. And we're left with a situation where it looks like Falkenberg are definitely in a mess. Kalmar, as per usual, and then at the minute Helsingborg are in the third bottom spot with maybe IFK and IEK still in slight danger, but looking like they're pulling away from it.
Yeah, I mean, I should just add they lost this weekend at Östersund, so that was the end of their 8-game run. AIK beat them 2-1 away, which was quite a big result for AIK who were turning things around slowly. But yeah, like I say, they went 8 games unbeaten, and in that run they had 5 wins. So, fair play to Östersund. In terms of the relegation battle, every single time you think that IFK or AIK could go down, Helsingborg, Kalmar throw it away. So, I think those 2 big boys are going to get away with it this season. I think Helsingborg, they're looking like the team that will, be in that relegation playoff. Maybe Kalmar are looking. They always find their way out of it, but don't they? But this season is going to be tough for them because there's 7 games to go, and they've got to get above IFK and AIK. These aren't teams that they usually compete against. It's big clubs. They've got to pull a 5-point deficit to get out of this, but that's against the IFK. So with a new manager at IFK now, Roland Nilsson, are they really going to slip that much? It's looking difficult. So Kalmar, they're going to pull off the magic escape. This is the time to start showing it.
Yeah. Right, well, I'm going to end it on the Swedish front there. It's going to talk about a couple more things before the end of the episode. And I just want to give a big shout out to a friend of the podcast, Tom Dent, who was a guest on the Nordic Football podcast a year or so ago, coach up there at Bodø Glimt. This week it was confirmed that he will be taking over as head coach of the current OBOS Ligaen side, Stjørdals-Blink. And Tom, I do know, worked there back there a few years ago. I think he was assistant manager. But he has signed a 4-year contract. He would be taking over duties at the start of 2021. Their current manager will finish the season, Roar Vikvang, and then Vikvang will be taken over as head coach at Rosenborg's academy. So Stjørdals-Blink, my pronunciation's terrible there. They're a club based in the Trondheim region. So they're sort of in the Rosenborg, Ranheim sort of area. And Dent said this, I'm really looking forward to starting. I'm glad I've been given this opportunity, but until January, I will stay away and let players and coaching staff concentrate on the rest of the season. Now, at the minute, they are in 7th place in the OBOS Ligaen. So sort of relatively comfortable mid-table, but only 2 points off the playoffs. So, look, Tom Dent who's only 29-year-old, by the way, so this is absolutely fantastic for him. He's a really great up-and-coming coach, we have to say. Whenever I've been in contact with Tom, he comes across really, really well. I think he can go superbly, but it's not inconceivable that he could be in charge of an Eliteserien club when he takes over.
Yeah, we've had him on the show before. It was quite early back in the day, wasn't it? We had him on and had a really great chat with him. He even joined us to talk about during one of our previews at one point, I believe, or definitely one of the early episodes. But he's going to be a busy man now, so I'm sure his calendar is going to be a bit more full. A few more media requests these days now as a head coach. Yeah, I was really happy when I saw the news. It's great to see people who've come on the show progress their careers and move on. Good friend of the pod, and definitely wish him well. It's going to be, I don't know, I can't say I know much about the team he's joined, but I'll certainly be keeping an eye on them now. So yeah, we definitely want to give a warm Nordic football podcast well wishes to Tom Dent in his new role.
Yeah, and I don't really follow the OBOS Ligaen that much, but if they were to be in that league next year, I would certainly keep an eye out a lot more, because it's certainly a bit more of an interest with a British coach there in charge, and the very best of luck to Tom. So that's that bit of business out of the way, and we're going to have to finish the podcast with another bit of business. And we did do a podcast roughly a couple of years ago, a full one actually, in depth about Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's move to Manchester United, which is a big thing for any Norwegian manager to be in charge of one of the biggest clubs in the world. And I know there's a few things you might want to get off your chest here, Jonathan, but I feel it's a good time to be talking about sort of Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, Manchester United, 2 years on. The good things, the bad things, and 6-1 loss to Spurs at the weekend. Is this worrying for Ole? Is it worrying for the club? What's going on?
Yeah, it is coming up to 2 years in charge, so probably a good time to maybe have a quick talk about him. I mean, if anyone follows me on Twitter, then I apologise, because I think I've had 90% tweets about Manchester United in the past few days as my patience wears ever thinner. So probably a good time to just get it out of my system now. But yeah, no. Solskjaer's an interesting one, isn't he? Because obviously we've named a Patreon tier after him. One of our Patreon tiers is the Ole Gunnar Solskjaer tier. He's a legend of Norwegian football. Some people criticize him to a certain extent, but I do think it's fair to say, I think there was a poll that said he's the most famous Norwegian ever at one point, many years ago, European Cup winning player. But yeah, well, in terms of Manchester United, I don't know if anyone saw the 6-1 against Spurs, but I definitely felt a bit like Patrice Evra after the game, with his comments that he wants to end his contract with Sky and just leave because he never wants to talk about Man United ever again. I don't know really what to say, Steve. To be honest, transfer window's just shut, and as a former season ticket holder, I'm at the end of my tether.
Yeah, I mean, there's clearly problems off the field for Manchester United, on the field as well with Ole. That I couldn't believe what I was seeing with the 6-1. I mean, I want to start off actually talking with tactics with Ole, because it's interesting to me. I think personally, pre-game, I think he actually he's come up with some very good tactical plans in the last couple of years, especially against sort of when United are underdogs or sort of 50-50 in a game, and they've worked out well. But other things I think haven't been very good, especially if you need to break a side down, stuff like that. In-game substitutions, tactics can be a bit concerning. I mean, on a tactical level, because at the end of the day, Manchester United long-term, you want to have one of the best managers in the world. Could you see a case in a few years, say he was still at United, where he's one of the top sort of 10 coaches in the world?
No, I think this will be his last season at Manchester United, in my opinion. I'll be very surprised if he's manager at the start of next season, and I'll give my reasons why. I think he's been hung out to dry by the board. I think this will be the beginning of the end for him now. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe, we'll be sitting here in a year's time and, the listeners can kind of call me out and call me an idiot. But I think this is the beginning of the end now. I think, this is a sort of a wider discussion, I suppose, because I remember when he was at Molde and in that episode when he did join United, we talked about his tactical approach and, how he'd done at Molde, won a league title, of course. And, we asked, could he manage it at such a big club? And he had such an incredible start, didn't he? At United, he got the feel-good factor back, brought some academy players through and, the famous Ole's at the wheel song, and things were going well. But, I think he'll be gone. And the reason that I say that is because I just think that Manchester United are stuck in a cycle of failure. And I think it's a cycle that has a very predictable path. Hire a manager, get into the Champions League. Once you're in the Champions League, don't back him. Then you have the expectations of the next season that aren't met. Then to deflect the attention from the real problem, sack the manager, start all over again. And I think we've entered that phase now of Champions League and don't back your manager. I think not getting Jadon Sancho is just an obvious error. I think, one of the top talents in the world. Okay, maybe we're in a pandemic, so, maybe that's... I think sometimes people probably look at United fans and think it's kind of a spoilt brat type thing, like, oh, why don't you just pay the £120 million? Or why are you talking about finances? But you have to bear in mind, Steve, that Manchester United have paid hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds in the past sort of 15 years on interest payments for the owners. Literally just interest, reservicing debt and paying off, debt that shouldn't be there. Manchester United are one of the most richest clubs in the world in terms of revenue earners. So I always liken it to this. It's like me coming to your house and saying, listen, Steve, I'm going to have to ask you to leave your house. I now own your house. I'm going to pay you back in the next 20 years with the debt payments that I've taken out on the mortgage of your house. But for now, get out of your house. I own it. And then I just pay you back on interest payments every year. And that's sort of how it is. And I'll rent it out. And the money I get in rent, I'll give to you eventually. And that's how I look at it, So Manchester United are a hugely rich club. But they repeatedly don't back the manager when it's time to do it. So I think with Solskjaer, there's such glaring errors in that squad that, it's a failure at the board level. And in terms of no director of football, that kind of thing, I think he's going to find it really, really hard with the squad he's got to get that team into the level that they need to be, which is probably Champions League.
Do you think that Solskjaer is just not able to thrive in that current environment at United and show his true potential as a manager, or is there really a world-class manager there in the making if he was in the right environment?
I don't think any manager can succeed at Manchester United in the current environment. Obviously, there's been criticisms about Solskjaer as a coach. You probably know more about that because you saw him close quarters at Molde. I mean, I've seen enough of him now to know. I've got questions. I think what you said 2 years ago on the podcast was 100% spot on. You talked about in-game changes. I think my biggest criticism of Solskjaer, even though I thought he did a fantastic job last season getting the team into third place. But I think when it came to the crunch, key games in 3 semi-finals, I think he was his in-game substitutions are questionable. I don't think for someone who built his niche on being a super sub, I don't think he's quite incisive enough in terms of tactical changes during the game or substitutions to change a game. I don't think he sees the flow of a game well enough. Sometimes he does, but I think more often than not, especially in the big key games like semi-finals, the Sevilla game, I can think of as one example. Whether it's because he doesn't have the personnel or just whether he's not quite there. I don't think he quite gets those key moments right to win a title at United or a Champions League. And I think that's where he's going to be judged now. And I think the squad isn't there at this moment in time to deliver that. So, if someone had told me at the beginning of the summer that United would wait till deadline day and sign a 33-year-old on a free transfer, I would have laughed, but I would have also said I think it's entirely predictable. And so this is the situation we're in. And yeah, I do worry. I feel for Solskjaer because, the manager that beat him 6-1 yesterday was Jose Mourinho. Mourinho was beaten 3-0 by Pochettino at Old Trafford when Spurs beat them 3-0. And it was the same thing. The comments were Mourinho's not a good enough manager. But I think Mourinho had the same issue. He's not supported by the board. The board asked for Harry Maguire. Mourinho asked for Harry Maguire and the centre back when he finished second. He wasn't backed by the club, and then they gave him a new contract, and then they sacked him and paid him off.
I mean, the thing with Maguire was Mourinho wanted him, and I think they could have got him for Leicester for like 45 million around that time. It was roughly half of what United paid eventually. I mean, how the hell do you get into that sort of position? It just feels to me like the transfer strategy in the last, 3 or 4 years, maybe even longer, has just been appalling. I mean, there have been the odd gem hit upon, and Fernandes was a very good signing in January. I actually have a feeling Cavani may work out all right, although I suspect it's more by luck than design. But I mean, this has to come back to. I mean, Ed Woodward, should he be sacked? Surely he's got to go. Yeah,
I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Because you never want to. Although I'm pretty clear on where the problem is, I'd never call for. I don't want to outwardly call for people to lose their jobs or anything like that. But at the end of the day, he's the highest paid director in the Premier League, and with that comes, I think, a responsibility. I think United are just stuck in a cycle. Every single season is the same outcome. It is literally. I know exactly what the next 3 weeks will bring. There'll be leaks to the media about Cavani and maybe the Athletic and the other, the Guardian or wherever. It'll be articles about how the magnificent negotiation skills to sign Cavani and Alex Telles, and the impact of social media, how much engagement it got when the deal was announced on deadline day, and how many hashtags there were talking about Manchester United. But you're kidding no one, to be honest. What happens on the pitch is what matters, and it's consistently the same thing. If Cavani's a good player, why not bring him in a month ago on a free transfer and get him in training? He'd be ready now. Could have come on against Tottenham when Martial was sent off. I think that Solskjaer probably gave his targets to the club very, very early, and it looks like they've not got at least the key one, Sancho. So, you talk about Cavani. There's only one player at the club who's a consistent crosser, and that's Alex Telles potentially, and he's only just joined. Who else is going to cross the ball to Cavani for, he's famously good in the air. Who actually crosses the ball at that club? Nobody. There's not one single player in the club who can cross the ball like consistently on the wing.
Cavani's a very interesting sign. I want to talk about him actually because I've followed him in French football. I do rate him as a player. Some people don't, but I rate him. He's a determined character, very experienced. He knows where the goal is. He's a fox in the box, but he's a good sort of complete striker. Maybe he lacks a little bit of pace these days, but he's 33-year-old. He's got to make an impact straight away. If he doesn't do something within 6 months, it's a flop. But he's an interesting player. I can't help think it is a panic signing, though. As much as I think they've kind of looked out in this, I agree with you. You should be looking to bring in a player like this straight away in the window, and it would, settle him in, and you would have got game time out of him already. But yeah, unfortunately, you're right. It does seem a bit of a mess. We're in a situation where, a player's wife has been on Twitter this evening to slagging off the club, hasn't she? So that's the sort of situation United are in, and you think Ole, he will either be sacked at some point this year or at the end of the season.
I think what happens with Manchester United is that the positive feeling that's been generated over the last sort of 6 months or so, the negativity comes during the transfer window. It's always during the transfer window. January was the same thing. United were in a semi-final against Manchester City in the Carabao Cup, and if Bruno Fernandes had played in that game, there's a good chance United would have gone to the final and maybe won a trophy. But they haggled till the deadline day of January, and then paid whatever Sporting Lisbon wanted anyway. So the haggling was completely pointless, and he missed a key game that could have maybe ended in a trophy. The same thing's happened now. The positive feeling of finishing third has been kind of washed away by this stream of negativity just from the constantly terrible negotiating and haggling and just plain-faced like desperation in the transfer market year after year. And that creates that negative feeling now. The season's not been good on the pitch already, 2 defeats. But that negative feeling is there now. So I think Solskjaer's got a really, really tough job to turn this around. He's going to have to get to January with no right winger, essentially, because they've signed a player, but he can't join until January, an 18-year-old. So, obviously I wish him well, and I hope the club does well. But I think until the director of football situation and the recruitment is properly addressed, and they get some real canny operators, and I think in terms of wider debate, if we widen this out to Scandinavia and clubs in Scandinavia as well, I think it really hits home You need good recruitment as a club to really achieve your ambitions. That's the bottom line of this. You have to have a good fluidity and functioning recruitment system to go with the manager's desires. And I think you can look at Allsvenskan, and I can look at the teams who are quite good at recruitment, and I can look at the teams who are not so good at recruitment and the edge it can give you. And I think Man United are just stuck in that cycle. They're not good at recruitment whatsoever. They're probably one of the worst in the Premier League, in my opinion, in terms of operations in recruitment, and it ends up having a drip effect on the pitch and breeds negativity that filters into this, from the fans to the club, in my opinion.
I just want to finish by talking about that Jadon Sancho situation, because if one player could have turned the whole window around for United, I mean, how much exactly did Dortmund want, and how much were United willing to pay? It kind of feels like you mentioned Fernandes and they haggled down right to the last minute there. Did they kind of believe that they could just wear down Dortmund in a similar fashion, do you think? And this time it's backfired.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to read the art of negotiation, too many art of negotiation books to understand the art of negotiation, do you? If you've got an asking price and you set your asking price, by all reports, Dortmund set their asking price and say, we have a deadline of August the 10th. If you haven't signed him by August the 10th, it's all over, because we have our own pre-season and our season to prepare for. And the club felt arrogant enough to wait till 3 days before the deadline to bid 30 million less than the asking price. In any environment, I just think unless you have some sort of leverage and you know what you're doing, that's just desperation. As soon as the bid came in, it was instantly rejected. I mean, what does that tell you? From my point of view, it's so transparently obvious now where the problem lies at United in terms of recruitment. It's just haphazard all the time. You can go back to Bruno Fernandes. You can go back to Marouane Fellaini in 2013 when the club, for Fellaini, his first signing of David Moyes, he had a 30 million buyout clause. He had, I think, a 28 million buyout clause that expired. Manchester United waited till after the clause had expired and paid out the higher buyout clause. So the negotiations are a complete shambles under Woodward and the Glazers. There's no doubt about that. And Sancho, I think they've missed out now on a talent potentially who his price may end up going up, or there'll be more competition for him because he is a very good player. But I'm not saying he's the answer. But at the end of the day, doing a business every single year on deadline day is just and signing players on free transfers. It was Ighalo in January. It was Falcao before that, Di Maria, players like that. It never seems to work out. If we widen it again out to, like I say, Scandinavia to wrap it up, you've got a glaring hole there in the centre back position. Victor Lindelof. There's started to be a lot of question marks about him now, the former Västerås player. And, he's got a lot to prove now, the Swedish international, because, Eric Bailly took his place and that didn't work out either. But there's question marks about Lindelof and Maguire. So, yes, it's like I say, it's a bit of a divergence from Swedish football. But obviously Solskjaer, from his point of view, I hope he's still there next season because he's a club legend. But I think it's going to be, with the other teams strengthening, Spurs, Arsenal, Chelsea, I think it's going to be a very difficult season for United now. Yeah,
I'll be honest, I don't see United finishing the top four myself now. I just don't. I just think other teams have got an edge there going forward. I mean, it should be top six, you would think, but I just feel like there's probably four better now than United going forward.
I think one thing I'll just say to wrap it up, I guarantee you, to anyone listening, you will see briefs to the media in the next 2 weeks about how good the club did in the transfer market. You'll see briefs about Pochettino. You'll see briefs about the manager. You'll read sort of articles about how the club did their business and how great it was. How many tweets the announcement video got. It's the same pattern every single time. They'll pat themselves on the back to the media, thinking they've done a great job, and then we'll get to sort of December and it'll all start again.
It's mad, isn't it? I mean, I just don't get why if you're willing to fork out 90 million on someone, you might as well just give you the 30 million straight away. Just get on with it. It baffles me. But a bit of an interesting end to the podcast there. We should do like a Premier League podcast one time, Jonathan.
There's a lot of them around, isn't there?
There's so much to talk about in the Premier League. It's crazy. But bumper edition of this episode of the Nordic Football Podcast. Doesn't look great long term for Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, according to our man Jonathan Fadugba there. I hope you all enjoyed the episode. I feel like we got through an awful lot today. And wishing everyone a really good, enjoyable international break. Sorry, we haven't had time to preview some. And in Norway, I've got a big game coming up in the Euro playoffs and stuff like that.
What's your prediction?
I think they've got the ability to do it. I really hope they have as well. I'm going to back them to get through.
Norway, Serbia. Jens Petter Hauge and Patrick Berg in the squad.
The tough game, isn't it? The first one's the tough game.
Yeah.
And then would it be Israel or Scotland, I do believe?
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, you've got to think Serbia are the best out of those three, but they've got the players now. Norway, so they've got to make sure they deliver it going forward. But yeah, I mean, hopefully everyone enjoys the international break, and then obviously we go back to domestic matters and European matters as well going forward, and there'll be plenty of episodes of the Nordic Football Podcast to keep you busy in the next few weeks.
Yeah, bumper show. We've covered transfers. We've covered both leagues. We've covered Europe. We've covered Ole Gunnar Solskjaer and a bit of Manchester United talk there as well. I've had a good little rant there. Got it off my chest. So we'll be back soon. And, by the time we come back, we'll be able to look at the run-in for Malmö and Bodø Glimt, who look like potentially being crowned champions this season. So thanks a lot to everyone. We're on Twitter at Nordic Footpod. I'm at Twitter, JF Football, FUTBOL. And Steve is at Meatman Soccer. He loves a bit of meat, don't you, Steve? And you can catch the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast in general. And of course, patreon.com/Nordic Football Podcast if you want to support us with a cheeky beer, maybe even a shot of Sambuca or, Jager bomb to get me over this miserable window for my club.
A fillet steak.
Thanks a lot. And I hope you enjoyed the show. Once again, it's been great spending time with you, Steve, and I hope we've provided some value for you guys.
Yes, well, we'll cheer up, my old friend, and we'll speak again in the next episode. But thanks, everyone. Take care, stay safe, and goodbye.